Hey friends, it's Simon Hurley from Simon Hurley Create with Ranger, and I'm here at Scrapbook.com to be sharing a look into my stencils. Now, one thing that's really awesome about some of the stencils in my line is you can kind of shift them to finish off the pattern and create a really awesome three-dimensional effect. So without further ado, let's take a look at it. Some of my stencils are designed with shifting in mind, and especially this one. This one happens to be called Flip Flop Chevron, and it's because you can create one pattern like this, and you can flip it if you want to complete the pattern and create it in another color. So let me show you how it works. I'm going to bring in the Make Art Station to do this part of the technique. I'm going to place down my stark white cardstock, place down my stencil, and then we can lay down the magnets on top to make sure that everything is going to be nice and held in place. Then I'm going to go in using a mini domed blending tool and a little bit of this really bright Prom Queen ink. And we're going to ink blend over top of my stencil. So this is a pretty basic technique. We're going to kind of finish off this chevron blending, and then I'll show you how to really step it up to a next level when we do our layering. So I'm going in here and blending. I find that this domed blending foam really helps to not get any harsh marks as I'm going in and coloring in my stencil. All right, so once I'm done blending, we can go in and lift off these magnets. I love how simple it is to kind of hold it down, but then move it pretty quickly. And we can remove that off the surface and check out our design. You could totally leave it like this and kind of have a little bit more of an open chevron design. But if you want to fill in the whole thing, it's pretty simple to do so. Now, before I do this, I want to just clean off my stencil because there's a little bit of excess ink on there. We want to make sure it's nice and clean before we go flipping it and moving it because we don't want any excess ink on our project. So just wipe this off. And then we started off with the stencil like this, right? It was shiny side up and it filled in the design like that. So now I'm going to flip it over to the more matte side of the stencil, and it's going to really easily fill in the different sections in between the chevrons. And it finishes off the pattern just beautifully. So I'll line everything up. Make sure that it's evenly aligned all throughout the background, and then we can go back in with our magnets to hold it down and add another layer down on top of here. Now you could totally do this with another layer of ink and do it in a different color, but today I'm going to step it up a notch and bring in a little bit of Lunar Paste to finish this off. All right, so when it comes to applying this, I'm going to grab my palette knife from my paste tool set, grab a little bit of that Lunar Paste, and again, like you've seen in the lessons beforehand, I'm going to go in and just apply some Lunar Paste to one side of the stencil here, put quite a bit on there so that it's going to go all the way across, and then we can bring in another paste tool. So this is from the paste tool set. It's got two different scrapers in it and a palette knife, which is really great for working with your paste. I love that it's all included in one pack. So then all you need to do is take this scraper tool and just scrape it across the surface of your design. If we need to, we can move these magnets out of the way to make sure we can scrape it all the way through. So when you're doing this, you can kind of tilt this on its edge like this, and more paste is going to come out and fill in that design really nicely. And do the same thing to the top, and make sure you spread it smoothly and evenly over top the whole surface. And then just one last final pass to make sure everything is nice and smoothed out. I love how easy it is to make sure it's nice and smooth with that big scraper tool. All right, so then we can lift this off the surface, and you can see it fills in that design just beautifully. And once this paste is dry, you're going to get that amazing and intense shine of this background. Check that out. I love it against the pink ink that we did. So just by kind of shifting that stencil and tilting it, you can get a really amazing effect. Then of course, clean your stencil right away, and with any excess paste that's on this tool, since we just used one color, it's easy to just scrape it all off and put it right back in so you don't waste any, and you can reuse that on your next project. All right, moving into this next technique, I'm going to use the tiny heart stencil. I love these little tiny stencils. There's also tiny circles and tiny diamonds in my line. But the really great part about these is they got a bunch of little tiny textures, so you can use them in a bunch of different ways on your backgrounds. Now, one of the ways to use them is, again, shifting your stencil. Now, they weren't quite designed for a bunch of different shifting, but with a lot of your stencils in your collection, you may be able to just kind of shift it and create your own different patterns, and that's what we're doing today. So I'm going to grab a piece of my stark white cardstock, Place that down on the surface. And then again, we're using the Make ArtStation to line everything up and make sure that it's held down in place. So I'll just place a couple magnets down in the corner to hold everything in place. And then we can go in and start our blending. I'm going to start off with a little bit of triple berry here and go in on top of these hearts to blend them out. It's a really simple way to just add a little bit of ink down onto the surface and get this nice heart background. Once we're done blending that layer, I'm going to lift off the magnets, and we have this nice background full of our hearts. Check that out, and you could totally leave this just as is. It's a really beautifully blended background. But if we want to, we can flip over this heart design, and again, with your stencils at home, if you're using these or other ones, just kind of flip them around and test out different ways you can place them. So here, I just flipped it around, and you can layer these hearts right on top of each other, and it fits right in the spaces there. So I'm just going to place the magnets down, and then we're going to go in with a little bit of Prom Queen to blend this out. Lift off that ink pad, and then go in with this color and start our blending. And again, I love how easy it is to just lift off the magnets and place them back down to kind of move on to the next step and layer. All right, so once we're finished with that, we can again lift off the magnets and check out that beautiful background. So I love that two-toned look that we get with the pink and purple on there. And then also, yeah, finding different ways to kind of shift your stencils to fill in the spaces and create cool patterns. All right, next I'm going to show how to create this really fun card using these 2 hot air balloons and layering up some stencils, as well as shifting the stencils to create some really fun and unique patterns. There's a lot involved here, but we'll kind of walk you through the several different steps. So for this, I'm using the Going Places stencil, which coordinates with the Going Places stamp set. So this stencil has the different masks that you could use to kind of mask off these images or do a couple different techniques with them. Masks are pretty helpful. So these are included in the set. And then you have the stencil itself, which is going to be really helpful in coloring in the different images from this set. First, we're going to stamp the images out. All right, so I'm going to place this down onto my acrylic block. And then to stamp it down, I'm going to use some jet black archival ink. So we're going to stamp this down. It'll be nice and black outlines for us. So just pat on that ink. And then you can stamp it right onto your card, giving it some good pressure to make sure everything transfers, and then lift it off the surface. We'll do the same thing with this smaller hot air balloon. Ink it up with some archival ink, and then we can stamp it down. I also wanted to bring in a sentiment, so I'm using the little sentiment acrylic block, and we can stamp this down with a little bit more jet black archival ink. And I'll stamp it in this little open space here. We can cut that sentiment out later. All right, then I'm going to grab the Going Places stencil, and you can just line this right up with the image. It lines up perfectly. Just place it down, and this is going to make coloring super simple. So I'm just going to place my magnets down to hold it all in place, and then we can start our blending. Now there are little open areas, so if you need to mask those off and make sure you don't get any color, you totally can. All right, then I'm going to go in with a couple colors on my ink pad to do a little bit of ink blending on the surface here. Now when it comes to ink blending, with this first layer that we're adding down on the surface, you can go a little bit lighter than you usually would. I'm not trying for a full intensity blend here because we're going to do several layers of ink, and we want the next layer that we add to stand out nicely. So I'm just going in and blending this down. And then I'll bring in a little bit of Roar and blend it into that yellow. And I love how my inks blend. They blend super smooth into the next color, and they leave no harsh marks, which is really beautiful. Last but not least, then we'll go in with a little bit of Bee Sting and blend it at the top. And then finally, for a little bit more dimension, I'm going to use some Game Over right at the top to really darken it up a little bit and add some dimension. Next, I'm going to bring in the sweater weather stencil. I love the kind of diamond pattern in here. It was originally released in the holidays, but honestly, I use it all year round because it's super versatile and it creates a really great shifted pattern as well. So I'm leaving this stencil down with the going places, but I'm going to also add down this sweater weather stencil right on top. So we can add that right on top. So I'm going to go in using a couple of my ink colors again, and this time we can go in full intensity on top of our colors. So I'm going in with a little bit of Slippery When Wet, then we'll bring in a little bit of Shooting Star and blend it together. And keep following through with the rest of the colors. So I'll go in with a little bit of Roar. And because these are translucent dye-based ink pads, when you blend them on top of each other like this, it's going to build up the color intensity and look like it's a lot darker when we're really using the same exact colors. Next, I'm going in with a little bit of Bee Sting, and then we'll finish it off at the top using some Game Over. Then when I lift the stencil off, again, I love those magnets, it makes it super simple. You can see that beautiful pattern that's starting to form there. Now to shift it, we started off with this large shape right in the center here, but there's also a smaller shape on the stencil. So what I'm going to do is bring that small shape over the large shape that we've already previously stenciled. And this is what I'm talking about, where you can really check out your own stencils in your collection and kind of line them up and see all the beautiful patterns you can make. Here I'm lining up the shapes so that they kind of overlap with the last layer. And then I'm going to go in with the same ink pads and do the exact same step. So I'm going to go in the bottom here and blend that out. And then I can go in with my Roar, blend that over top of the orange color, and you can even use kind of the excess ink that's still left on your tool. And I'll go in with a little bit of Bee Sting and finish it off up top. And when we lift this off, you can see the really awesome shifted pattern that you get. It almost creates kind of a kaleidoscope look, which I really love on top of this hot air balloon. All right, so to stencil down this little basket at the bottom, I'm going to take a little bit of my mint tape, mask off that top area. Then we can go in with some of our brown inks. So here I'm using a little bit of Gur. I'm going to lightly blend this over top there. Then if we want a little bit more shading in depth and dimension, we can always go in with a little bit of Weeping Willow. This is a lot darker of a brown. And I'll just go in and shade the edge just a little bit to add a lot of depth and dimension. Then we can lift everything off, and you'll see that really amazing hot air balloon that we just created. And I love the Going Places stencil because it coordinates perfectly to really easily color that in. And then of course, you can use the same small hot air balloon to do the exact same technique and color that in. And there's also some little clouds that you can add to the background of your sky. There's also a stamp in the set that adds kind of a detail to your basket. So I'm going to go in with a little bit of Weeping Willow, which is my darker brown. And we can go in and stamp that little detail on that. And I think that really just kind of brings the hot air balloon basket to life with that little grid detail there. All right, so then to fussy cut this guy out, I'm going to go in with a little small scissors, and I'm just going to go right around the image, leaving a little bit of a white border. When I cut this, I also like to kind of move the paper instead of moving the scissors. I find that it gives a little bit of a smoother cut, and it makes it a little bit easier to fussy cut the image out. It's a pretty easy shape, so it's not too difficult to cut out. And then same thing with the sentiment. Again, I like to fussy cut this out as well. I find that it's a little bit better than adding on a rectangle, but you could totally just kind of cut out a strip of cardstock and stamp it down as well if you don't want to go into the little details and fussy cut this out. But I like the look that it gives. All right, so once we got these images all cut out, I'm going to work on the card background. So here I'm using that same sweater weather stencil. Again, I just love it because it's a good geometric look. I'm going to place this right down onto my card. And then again, I'm going to use the Make Art Station magnets to hold it nicely in place while we do our stenciling. For this, I'm going to use a little bit of Breakup Blue. This is a great muted blue color that is perfect for skies. I'm going to go in here and just use my blending tool to blend it all throughout this stencil. All right, once that is all blended out, we can lift that off, and you'll see that nice blending there. But again, I want to kind of match the rest of my card. So with the hot air balloon, you saw that I kind of shifted my stencil up and over. I'm going to do the same thing here. So I want those big shapes to go over top of the small shapes, so that it'll kind of create this really nice overlapped effect. and it'll almost look like a kaleidoscope like the hot air balloons did. So I'm going to then lay that down, place my magnets down, and we can do our blending. Now with this, we can blend it out. You'll notice that this bottom part isn't completely covered. So I'm going to start blending this top section out. And when we get about this far, I'm going to stop here, lift my stencil off, and then we can shift it downward. So I'm just going to move this stencil down, but I'm going to lay the same shapes over that I was just working with. Not shifting it at all, just moving the stencil down so that more of the pattern is down at the bottom here. And then we can layer this right together. So all you need to do then is just continue your blending, and it'll pick up right where you left off and layer in with those shapes super easily. So when we lift that off, we've got a nice completed pattern. And again, I love that this looks like a kaleidoscope. Again, play with your stencils, because when you shift them like this, you've got a lot of awesome effects that are in store for you. All right, to finish off this background, I'm going in with the same color, just a little bit of the breakup blue, and I like to just go around the edges. You guys have seen me do this a lot throughout this class, but I really like to add some ink around the edges to, again, darken the edges and bring your eye towards the center of your card. I find that it really helps kind of bring your eye to the focal point, and it also gives a nice finished look to the edge of the card. So there we have that finished, beautiful background, and I love that it kind of carries throughout the hot air balloon, so it really matches each other when we put it together. And I love that it's got the same design on the hot air balloon, so it really matches each other when you put it together. All right, so I'm just going to add a little bit of tape runner to the back of this card, and we can stick it right down to a stark white card base. I made this using the stark white cardstock and folding it in half after you cut it. And then we can go in and adhere this down onto the card. And for this, I wanted to use a couple different foam squares to give it a little bit of dimension. So I'm just grabbing some foam squares here and adding them all over the back of my piece to pop it up. All right, so I've peeled off the backing sheets, and then we can add these right down onto our card. You can see there's lots of dimension there when we add these down, and then place the sentiment in the open corner there. I love how this card turned out with that different pattern that we used from the sweater weather stencil to kind of create that kaleidoscope look throughout, and layering it up on the Going Places stencil too to really easily color in that image. I hope you guys enjoyed these card making projects we created in today's lesson, using some of my stencils and showing some of the fun ways they shift and layer together to create some really beautiful card making effects. I can't wait to see what you guys do with them.